What's up guys, Asian here again with another theory crafting video, and as you can tell from the title, we're going to be exploring whether it's actually worth using the Storm Atronach or not on a Sorc healer. So this was actually sort of a thought experiment kind of proposed to me by a raider in Valor, the Guild of Valor. If you guys don't know, Valor is a endgame PvE guild that has been pushing very high scores. If you guys know Nos, he's actually a member of Valor, so they are very, very high end there. So one of the thought experiments was how much additional DPS would you get from running like a Storm Atronach versus like a Warhorn on a Sorc healer. Now, naturally, my inclination is to think, well, obviously you would want to use Warhorn because Warhorn boosts everybody's DPS compared to using the Storm Atronach, which only boosts one person's DPS. Well, arguably two, because it does give Major Berserk to the Atronach as well. But on a Sorc healer, typically speaking, you will not be dealing as much damage as a dedicated DPS, so we're kind of ignoring that part of it. But I figured I would try to do some math behind it, just to kind of figure out exactly at what point, if there is any realistic point, where you'd want to use the Storm Atronach on a Sorc healer. So this is going to be a little bit complicated here, just because we pretty much have two unknowns, so I had to do a little bit of thinking in order to really sort of make this translatable, basically try to find some form of numerical values that would make sense here. So the first thing that we're going to need to figure out first is how much DPS does Major Berserk actually give you. So the Storm Atronach ultimate on sorcerers, when you activate the synergy, you get Major Berserk, which gives you 25% additional damage done for 8 seconds. Now, of course, due to the way that all of these damage done modifiers work, they're all additive with each other. You're not actually getting a full 25%. It's typically going to be a little bit less than that. So in order to kind of figure that out, just exactly how much we're getting, we need to make a few assumptions here. So I am making a few assumptions, and obviously these numbers are going to change a little bit depending on whether your specific values deviate from my assumptions. So first of all, obviously we need to assign values here. So Minor Berserk gives us 8% additional damage done. Minor Slayer gives us 5% additional damage done. Then I'm assuming that we have 11 points in the Mighty and 19 points, I should say 11% from Mighty, and both Master at Arms and Thaumaturge are sitting at 19%. So we have 19% from our CPs. These are the assumptions that I'm making. So for the most part, I'm assuming that you guys are running a Stamina Nightblade or with one sharpened trait. Of course, these are all assumptions. So if you're running like double sharpen, you're going to have a few more points into Mighty, a few more points into your Thaumaturge and Master at Arms. So just kind of bear that in mind, that these are fairly generous assumptions here. So our percentage boost from Berserker is just going to be this value here, which ends up being about 17.6% increase in damage done rather than the full 25%. Now, next we have to take a look at how much DPS we should be expecting to see from Warhorn. So Warhorn gives us Major Force, which boosts our critical damage done by 15%. Now, we do need to kind of really figure out what is our crit damage modifier as well as our crit chance, because obviously we need to figure out how much increase DPS increase we get from that, and we do need to take a ratio of our crit damage modifiers. So I basically assumed that we were running this particular build here. So again, we're kind of assuming that we are running a Stamina Nightblade, and I'm assuming we're running Validreth, Reliquin, and Advancing Yokeda. Nern and Sharpen on the front bar, and I did activate all the buffs here, so Major Force, Major Savagery, Minor Force. We do have the Shadow Mundus, so we did take that in consideration here. So for weapon crit, we have 83.8 when we have all of our stacks of Advanced Yokeda active. This might not necessarily be the case, but I am taking sort of the best case scenario. I'm assuming that you're able to basically maintain this your Advanced Yokeda up at all times. Again, not necessarily going to be the most realistic scenario, but I'm trying to basically work with, at the very least, consistent numbers here. And then our critical damage is going to be 124%, and then we take Alpha Minor Force, we just take out 15%, and that leaves us with 109% instead. So when we do all of that, we end up with, this is our modifier with Major Force, and we have a modifier without Major Force. You just take the ratio between them, and that gives us 6.57% increase in damage from Warhorn. Now, Warhorn lasts for 9.5 seconds, and the Atronach lasts for 8 seconds. So we do have to take that in consideration here because they do have differing durations. If they had the exact same durations, we can just say, okay, those numbers cancel out. So our ultimate sort of logical equation is going to be the difference in DPS from the group with Warhorn boost. So that would just be take your group DPS, multiply by the Warhorn boost, and subtract out your base group DPS, and you multiply that by 9.5 seconds. And that has to be smaller than the solo DPS boost. So again, the boost from getting the Berserk, and then you subtract out your base DPS before you get Major Berserk, and then you multiply that by 8 because it lasts for 8 seconds here. So then we just replace the Warhorn boost and the Berserk boost, respectively here. Now, the tricky part here is group DPS and DPS, because these technically are related to each other, but you can't exactly say group DPS is Y and DPS is X. That doesn't really work out that way, because your personal DPS also contributes to the group DPS. So the way I decided to kind of approach this was group DPS can be thought of as a value, in this case Y, plus that person who would be activating the Storm Atronach, their DPS, which I'm just calling X right now. So group DPS becomes a value, the quantity Y plus X. So we use Y plus X as our group DPS, and our DPS is just X. So then when we replace it all, we have this, it looks a little bit complicated just because of all the parentheses, but it's basically the quantity Y plus X times your Warhorn boost, subtract out the quantity again, Y plus X, times 9.5, and you do the exact same thing over here. Now, once you kind of carry out everything out, it pretty much boils down to just your Warhorn boost without the 1 attached to it, so just your straight up percentage boost. So we have 0.0657y plus 0.0657x times 9.5. Again, we do need to take into consideration different durations here. And then for the Atronach side, we have 0.176x times 8. Again, we have to take consideration duration. So then we multiply out the 9.5 and the 8, and we get these values. So 0.624y plus 0.624x has to be less than 1.408x. Then we can, obviously we have two values with x, so we can subtract out this the left-hand side from the right-hand side, and that gives us a 0.624y has to be less than 0.784x. And then when we try to solve for x, which is what we're interested in, your x has to be greater than 0.796y, which, remember, is the group DPS without your personal DPS. And this, again, from a sort of more abstract view, when you kind of pull away all the math, it sort of makes sense. With the Atronach, you're giving one person, in this instance, 17.6% DPS for 8 seconds, versus using Warhorn, which gives everybody, if you're running 8 DPS, everybody gets that 6.57% increase in damage done. So naturally, Warhorn is going to be a far stronger boost in DPS. To kind of put these mathematical numbers into sort of more less abstract terms, if your DPS that picks up the Storm Atronach is doing, just do 1 minus this 0.796, so about, or actually if your DPS is doing about 79.6% of the DPS, then yes, the Storm Atronach is going to give them a stronger boost compared to Warhorn for the entire group. But otherwise, you do want to use Warhorn here. Now, of course, everybody's personal DPS is going to see a small loss. Obviously, if you pick up the Major Berserk, you can get a much larger boost. And of course, you can also run Warhorn on another healer and still get the Major Berserk boost from Sorc healer if you want to do that. You can run 3 Warhorns, for example, 2 tanks and your second healer, your Templar healer, for example, running Warhorns, then your Sorc healer is running Storm Atro, so that way you get the boost of both worlds. But if you had to make the choice between running Warhorn and Storm Atronach on a Sorc healer, you're going to want to run Warhorn again, because that just boosts everybody's DPS compared to the Atronach, which only boosts one person's DPS. So that's kind of how the math all plays out there. Again, from a kind of very, very broad conceptual standpoint, abstract standpoint, it makes sense just because Warhorn affects 8 people versus the Atronach affecting 1 person. But it's nice to be able to kind of put actual numbers and values to that, so it's not just it feels like it should be this way, therefore it is this way. So that's pretty much it for this video here. So for all you Sorc healers out there, make sure you're running Warhorn. The only time I can possibly see using Storm Atronach would be when you want some additional, more burst damage. So maybe if you want to burn down a boss in 4-man content, maybe the Storm Atronach would be more useful here, just because it gives you a larger boost for those shorter fights. But otherwise, you are going to want to run Warhorn instead. Hopefully you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.